to talk about
That's what he was saying. So on the way down here.
potential fire station village and bond proposal language. We typically kick off our work sessions with non-arranged participation. Is Nancy somebody that was just tuning in? Do we know who Nancy is? Can you unmute Nancy or unmute everybody just so we
I
can?
think I- she's.
I'm just a Dexter resident and I'm listening in just to, I'm interested.
Great, thanks for joining us, Nancy. Anything to add other than that?
Nope, thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Can we get your full name and address, please?
Yep, my last name is Patterson with 1 T. And my address is 612 Boardwalk Lane.
Great, thank you very much. Boardwalk in the Grandview area. Okay. I will turn it over to Justin to lead us through the packet then, under number 2, please.
Sure. So previously we talked about the 2 prospective locations for the fire station. But at the last work session, council asked David Gasson with Fires and Architecture to spend a little bit more time and come back with more equivalent information for both of the locations, and his team is working on that, and they expect to have that information back for the June 27th city council meeting. But in the interim, I thought that it might be a good idea to kind of start talking about the financing side of the project. And I've provided some information in a few different areas. We reached out to our bond counsel to kind of talk through the process and get estimated bond payback figures, along with providing language that we had previously had developed when we're looking at putting an item on the ballot in 2019, 2020. And so just to kind of walk through it real quick. For those who aren't familiar with how tax bills are generated and how you calculate the value of a tax bill versus a mill, that information is provided right there. For the actual process to get to the point where we're issuing a bond, the idea is that city council would determine the cost of the project. City council would pass a resolution, basically authorizing staff to put an item on the ballot for a bond proposal for that amount, with the idea that the millage that would be generated to pay back that bond proposal is only up to whatever is needed to pay back the bond in a given year. So then we go through the process of putting that item on the ballot. Voters vote on that ballot proposal. And then we go through a very similar process to what we did for this building, between issuing the official statements, getting the proposals back from banks for basically what that lending looks like. And then we finalize the sale and close the bond and proceed with the project. There are items, there's starting on page 4, there's the resolution submitting the bond proposal, and that's similar to what it's the same as what city council approved in I believe it was 2020 to place an item on the ballot, and then that ultimately got pulled back due to COVID. There is draft proposal language for the ballot on pages 8 and 9. And then estimated bond payback schedules on page 10, 11, 12, and 13, depending on the amount. So I asked our bond counsel to put together kind of 4 options, just to kind of give you a flavor of what the bond payback schedule would look like, with the understanding that, there could be a range of options somewhere in the middle, and potentially that's where we could end up, depending on how city council wants to proceed. But there's a $3 million option and a $10 million option, with an estimated 0% growth and an estimated 2% growth for each. And then on page 14 is it was in 2019 that city council authorized the resolution to proceed with a bond issuance proposal to put it on the ballot. And then ultimately that was withdrawn. Jimmy had submitted some questions in early May, and I initially reached out to Scott Munzel, and I think I reported on this previously, but Scott's brother is on DAFD, and so we ultimately decided not to proceed with him issuing his thoughts on it, and instead I reached out to Dykema, and then I had to follow up with Dykema a couple of times, and ultimately ended up having a phone conversation with one of our attorneys with Dykema. And I provided in the report kind of a summary of what his thoughts were in response to those questions. So with that, where would council like to start?
So in the bond scenarios, like the first one, the 266 million. Is that projected for 2024? Did you project that number?
For, you mean on page 10?
Yeah, or 12. Yeah.
Yeah. So that that's a number that I believe he generated, and he may have pulled that off of our previous bond issuance.
Okay.
That's our real.
That is our ad valorem rail.
6643. Oh, no, it's not. He must pull off last one.
Well, because we would use it minus DDA, right? Okay, well, on your cover models talked about 244 is all I was.
Right.
Is all I was getting as a number difference. I just wondered if they projected it out 2 years. It's close.
possible.
It's close enough.
Yeah.
I just wondered if that's still good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm happy to just lay out my thinking on this. So as we've been talking about this over the past several months, I've been open to all the information that we've seen. And I have a hard time like pushing back on Chief Smith when it comes to what he says he needs in a station. And I don't know where to look for information to sort of counter him on those points. I'm open to that information. So, I mean, how I feel like this in general, and maybe I've said this before, I'm not necessarily wed to keeping the station at its current location. I think there are other things that could be done with that property that could better serve the public. And if the fire chief is not concerned about relocating the main station, I'm not concerned about relocating the main station. And also in terms of like the main station versus substation, that's why I went back to the interlocal agreement, because it seemed like there was sort of clear guidance in the interlocal agreement about the main station needing to be the center of control and operations and what that all entailed. And I looked at that other Highland Township and they had a similar layout. They were in the same, so there was main station and 2 substations recently built, but the difference is that it's under one governing body. So they had the support from the governing body to pursue these 3 stations in that layout. So in our situation, we have sort of 3 governing bodies, or actually 1 governing body in DAFD that have the representatives from the 3 other governing bodies. And so the sticking point for me is, why is the city of Dexter obligated to pay for the main station? Is the city of Dexter obligated to pay for the main station? So that's what the whole thinking was. that I don't, my problem isn't necessarily with the design that's being proposed at the new location. I think if that's what's truly necessary, I'm happy to look at information that says it's not necessary. My problem is, why do City of Dexter residents have to bear that full cost burden? And so that's where I was going with that line of questions, and it seems like the response is we don't. And maybe there is some implication that we could change how much we're charging to lease said building. But I don't know how much traction there is to that point. I don't know if we have any success going to the other townships and saying, hey, well, actually, the way the interlocal agreement is worded. So then I went down the line of thinking of, well, would they come back to us and say, well, why does it, if we're going to rethink the interlocal agreement, why does the main station have to be in the city of Dexter anymore? So I reached out to Chief Smith, and he had said, well, actually, the city of Dexter would not necessarily be the ideal location for a main station if we were planning for the whole DAFD service area. So then we'd be looking at a trade-off of not having a station there, if there's even land available to do that. So sort of this is like stream of consciousness, me trying to let you know all the things I'm thinking about. I know this is specific about the bond, but this is related to who's paying for what. So I'm curious to know what people think about that, and I mean, does anybody see a way where the city of Dexter doesn't have to pay for the full cost of the main station if it is implemented pretty much as presented? Either, I mean, I guess for either site, if we're renovating or if we're building new at a new location, if there are things that we're putting there that benefit the entire service area, and if we're not bound by the interlocal agreement to pay for it all, does anybody see any window of opportunity there so that we don't have to pay for it all?
Well, I can say to that is there are some weird dynamics, obviously, in how the thing is structured. And so I brought up the point at one of my first DAFD meetings that it disincentivizes any unit of government from making investments that reduce operating costs. So for example, if we were to put an air to ground thermal heat exchange system to heat and cool the building, that generally pays off for itself in 8 years, and everything after that's great. But there is much higher upfront cost. And it's a disincentive for any unit of government to do that, because we pay for the entire cost of the building and only a third roughly the cost of operation. So our payback time goes from 8 years to 24 years. And I threw out there, hey, would there be interest in the DAFD considering throwing some money towards, upgraded heating cooling system? And it landed like a thud. There was absolutely no response, so I don't think there's an appetite.
I think whenever you bring up something that's a new idea, you have to expect that the initial reaction may be, oh, wait, no way. However, once that kind of sinks in and people think, maybe there is something to that, or how could we do it? Then I think it becomes that there's your window there after you get through. Yeah, letting it, but getting the idea out there, whoa, you gotta give it a little time and get beyond that. Do we have that kind of time? I don't know.
So the attorney did say that if we are looking to move the main station to a different location, then we would need to look at the interlocal agreement and the lease agreement, because both specifically mention 8140 as.
We would also, if we're going to lease for more than 3 years, have to get board approval. At present. A couple of questions and thoughts I have. You want to start with the questions or the really sad ones?
How was the conference? Do you have an update about that?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the really sad news related to costs. And you can check the numbers here. The cost escalation from the 2020 to the, 2020, the cost escalation was 14%. 21, it was 21%. They're estimating that 22 is going to be 33% escalation. So if you do the math, a fire station that cost roughly $7.9 million in the fall 2020 construction season will cost $14 million in the 2023 construction season. 7.9 to 14. So start that. I also asked about how that compared for cost escalation for remodeling and additions. And the response I got from the architects, and these are national folks, but Ann Arbor, Detroit is not a weak market. We're not in Wyoming in the middle of the Badlands somewhere where construction is, well, Wyoming's perhaps a bad example, but we're not in the lower half of construction. They said that the cost for significant remodeling and additions tend to be higher than that, especially now because construction companies, it's much easier to do a green site. You get it done quickly, you get on to your next project versus having to screw around and deal with uncertainty more. So the cost escalation for extensive remodel addition is probably higher than that. So that was really, really sad to hear that we bought so much more $1 million in debt for whatever we're gonna do. For the bonds, my understanding is had we voted for this and it been approved in the August, we could have started collecting with the winter taxes. Is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Okay, I heard that from the school folks as part of the reason why they pushed the result.
Yeah, the school for sure, and the county for sure, because that's when their villages are normally collected. I would have to find out. for the city.
Okay. Is there an opportunity for us to give property owners an early payoff option? And by that, I mean, you know, special assessments, if you can come in the front, the first year and you pay the thing off, you're done. Is that an option we have available to us or not?
If it's structured as a geo bond, no. If it's structured as a special assessment district, I mean, then we'd have to ask bond council. Special assessments, yes, can be paid off ahead of time. But if we were to look at something like that, we would have to ask bond council, how would we structure it?
Okay,
Because usually special assessments are related to a specific area, and this is citywide, so I don't know. Could be done.
yeah, I know there, I think SILE does that for the road improvements. They have a, it's a tricky thing they did there. One other thing for the cost before we get to the ballot that we hadn't really discussed. I know we had a training session approved with Mr. Newell before the election. We decided to sit on that. Is we seem headed towards a traditional design bid build product process where we have our guy design a thing and then we put it out to bid and then we build it with something. That is very traditional. It also tends to result in a higher cost compared to other mechanisms. And I say that so the other process is a construction manager at risk. And so that is you basically get your plan somewhere between 50 and 80% done, and then you go find your builder. And the reason why that's advantageous, especially these days, is your architect may design something with steel I-beams. And the builder knows, I can't get steel I-beams for 18 months. So how about we look at something with tip-up concrete walls or something, or masonry, where the builders have the experience in what's available and what the actual costs are and how to save money. So if we want to get a more accurate cost for the bond, we ought to start to have that conversation. And I know there's not a lot of time, but that's all I've got.
And we did go the CM route for the wastewater treatment plant.
And that's how we ended up with tip-up concrete walls instead of brick masonry, as I recall.
That's good info, Zach. What else do you learn with the comments?
I've tried to limit it to the bond stuff now. I can answer other questions before we get done earlier.
All right, fair enough. Well, my takeaway from the escalation part then is that it becomes important for us to figure out what we need to spend. Because it just is, we don't need to overspend, I guess. We don't need to overspend. I guess where I'm going at is, you know, if, and I'm not sure that the service model is where I get stuck up all the time on this, because the number of runs in the townships are increasing much faster than the number of runs in the city.
Mhm.
And you know, if putting the equipment or putting the people or putting whatever. I mean, ultimately, this department is probably headed towards a model that has 2 fire stations downtown, not 2 fire stations, 2 firefighters staffed in town somewhere. And then 2 in each of the communities that are a part of the agreement, as opposed to 2, 1, and 1. And if that's the case, 2, 2, and 2, there might be a different service response model than having 10 bays worth of equipment at one place and 6 bays worth of equipment in another, and 4 bays worth of equipment. It might need to be more balanced. But I don't know that for sure.
Do you know any municipalities who have a setup that is more like that? Like, have you, for me, it would be helpful to see. So like when I saw Highland Township, I said, oh, this, like the size and scope of their buildings is analogous here. And they've got these same types of trucks at each of these stations. I would be happy to look at a place that has the staff that you described at each of 3 stations and to see, you know, but I don't know how you Google that easily.
Well, and some of it, I'm not trying to be your play fire chief, but it just intuitively to me, that's how you would want the people nearest the largest response area. And I don't want less than 2 people in downtown. Because I like that we have the 2 people here, but the reason there's so much response from our one station is because they only have 1 person in the townships, and that's where all the runs go. So when there's a run call, somebody has to respond from a different station, i.e. ours.
There is a,
And the history, sorry, I was just gonna say that the history gets in the way. I mean, it was our fire department. It was the Village of Dexter Fire Department before the townships were part of the interlocal agreement. And, you know, that's why we've always wanted to maintain the center of control, or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's
Because
really
there
what,
was a little nervousness about somebody pulling out, so then it was written in that you don't take your marbles with you when you go. All that sort of stuff is really hard to pick through and hard to get it to something that everybody agreed to.
but it's a frail model too, because, you know, like Webster Township's ability to fund is based upon the people voting in their public safety or millage or whatever they call it there. And it
Yeah,
only passed by 5 votes the last time it was.
Yeah.
It was out there, and I think that's also on this August ballot.
So why do you think that's been less supported than that? It was come down to that, because it never used to be that. You know, margin.
I don't know, I'm hoping that the fact that they now have a fire station and a better response makes a difference, Paul. You know,
Which
the
townships?
Webster Township, I mean, there were times, a lot of that, those township residents waited a long time when there was a need for a call, and the response just was not great, but it's only because it was a long way to get there.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that there's a station there now with at least one person and ability to respond, they've cut the time in half. Zach, thanks for letting me go.
Yeah. I just want to make everyone aware, so we've heard the third funding with the city being less than a third more recently. That's only the billable runs. So there's something called the shared runs, which depending on the year, somewhere between 20 and 25% of all the runs that they do. Those tend to be, not all of them, but they tend to be either in the city at the schools, at the parks, at the station, or south of us. So know that there's a big chunk that is still happening here, even if we're not paying for it.
You say south of us, you mean instead of country.
Yeah,
Yeah, mutual aid is what I'm saying, right?
well, the shared runs include the mutual aid.
Yeah, right,
So it's the runs that aren't billable to any of the three participating.
right. But like SILE would be a mutual aid one, that's out of community.
Yeah, there's a number
That's out of
there
there.
as well.
I mean, I'm somewhat inclined to just ask for the money we need for a new station. Maybe we come up with a way to scale it back. I mean, $14 million. Is insane. I absolutely do not want to get to a point where there's nothing on the ballot. So, we need something on the ballot. I don't want to get to the point where we have nothing on the ballot. I think that would just be, I think it was a missed opportunity. It didn't happen in 2020. I can understand why it didn't. I can understand why people would say we can't do it now, inflation, all these other things. We can let the people decide. So we need to figure out what that's going to be so that they can make a decision on their own.
What are you going to do? And how much is it gonna cost? and all
And-
that?
Yeah. And I mean, and I don't know, part of me is inclined to, not ask for it all. I mean, I see I know people are watching what's happening with intergenerational millage schools are doing and the public comment on that. Is it too much? All of that, all of those comments. Yeah, I don't really want to cut corners though either. I want to be respectful of people's financial situations. But I also want to do right by the fire department, which in turn does right by the citizens. So.
Well, I don't have any problem with,
But the
as long as
thought,
we can describe the scenario and what the alternative is likely going to be if it doesn't pass.
well, we're also having somebody retire. We're also going to bring somebody on. When do we entertain that person's comments? Because that's chief then. And this is chief now. And it seems to me like there should be at some point, we ought to find out what the new person says.
We didn't
Or
want to
thanks.
listen to what the current chief said, though.
He was in here and made presentation, and Jamie's referred to him several times about the chief, so I'm saying that he's gonna be gone. And I personally would like to know, I know what the chief thinks, I think, the current chief. I don't know who's coming, and I don't know what they'll say.
Did that come up in the interviews at all with Doug? His perspective on this issue.
I think that, I don't think we asked specific questions about this topic because he's supposed to be the chief for the whole area.
Yeah,
We didn't put him on the spot with the city's issue, just in fairness to the question. I think that Doug, a part of my comment about 2, and 2, I think that Doug did answer questions, some of which maybe Zach might have asked about his vision for the future. I forget how they came up or when they came up. But I think he believes that there's a need for more people in the district. And that the people will need to be supported by equipment in different places, which again, might mean there's a slightly different way to respond if you have more people, and might mean that you don't need to have as big a station. Albeit it could still be a new station, which would be smaller.
I kind of went into the same thought process and kind of rabbit hole as you did. It's, you know, there is a part of me that is like, it's so unfortunate that the three groups couldn't have a discussion to build 3 stations that can be more collaborative and not put all the burden, or most of the burden in one group versus the other 2. And I don't necessarily think that, you know, the design that is proposed is wrong. I'm stuck in the same spot of what are we asking Dexter residents to pay for? And the Dexter residents of today versus Dexter residents of 20 years from now, what is the, and I really don't even have answers to these yet, right? It's just my thought of like, what are we asking those here now to pay? What are we providing for that? What are we asking for them to pay for the future? Can things be done in phases? As one of the videos that Chief had sent was a fire station that was built in phases. These sort of thoughts are all going at the same time. But I also agree that I would like to see something in terms of engagement and on the ballot. But I don't know what that is, so. Sorry, I didn't help. I just wanted to say that I was going through the same thought process and agree with you.
Well, the question, I guess the question is gonna come back when we get an update on the cost, right? I mean, I think that, you know, if the voters are willing to spend 10 million or 14 million or whatever the number is, doesn't make it easy, but it makes it easier. I just don't know at any point if that is something that it's hard to measure. I mean, it's really hard to measure whether that's, you know, or whether that's a passable thing. I don't think anybody questions the need, but I do think they question the cost.
And so one thing I'll throw out there towards this is one of the other questions I did ask was why does everyone call it a 50 to 75 year facility? And there's a very basic reason for that. The average age of a fire station facility in the US is 50 years. If you go around and take all the fire stations, the average age of service is 50 years. The average age at time of replacement is 75 years, which ours currently is coming up this year. So their advice is you have to plan as if it's going to be there. That doesn't necessarily mean you build it out what it's going to be in years 74 and 75, but that you are able to accommodate those changes. And where I am perhaps more comfortable than others is I see us as stewards, not just today, but into the futures. I get very furious every time we have to make money payments into the OPEB or the retirement thing, because the people before us said, well, let them figure it out. Let them figure out how to pay for this. We're going to get the benefits now and let them pay for it. And you know, I've heard from some folks, why don't you just build what you need for the next 20 years? When the bond's done, let the people then figure it out. that means we're going to be, potential replacement of a fire station at 20 years instead of 75. That's poor investment of funds. And that's just why I'm comfortable making that investment, so that people aren't furious at us with going cheap, it's costing them more.
Zena?
I want to be clear that I was not saying in that sense that we only do for 20 years and put us in a situation that we have to redo everything in 20 years, right? When we heard about this design, one of the things that I was very encouraged to hear was that in terms of the structure, they were thinking of a 50-year building, but in terms of what is inside, to be able to update and change in 20 some years if things change and need to happen. To me, is there a way that we can do a combination? That's what I meant in terms of phases. This is not again, there were a couple of videos that Chief Smith sent that there were fire stations that thought about both at the same time. So I'm not saying that we do something, or my comment wasn't that we do something now and let the future generation of Dexter people figure it out. I was thinking that, are there ways that we can think of that long term, but work on phases and things in a way that is sort of has both in mind, not just say, well, let them figure it out.
Yeah, and my comment wasn't directed for you. I've heard from other people in the community, like, well, why are we building something that's gonna last longer than paying it off?
Yep. I am open to the concept of phasing the design or doing a two-part design or something like that, where you build most, essentially what you need for now, but you leave room for adding on as we need the additional trucks or something like that. I mean, I guess I would need to hear from Chief, current, anticipated, what the likelihood is of sort of the provision of services and where people are located changing. But I totally agree with you, Zach, that I don't want to just kick the can down the road. I don't know how to reconcile those two things. Just saying that I don't know to what extent it's been discussed of doing a phase and then knowing you're going to add on with a plan to add on later. And I mean, I don't know enough about economic forecasts to figure out, is it going to be any better in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Or is it always just, everything just keep going up?
Even if we think of something of a 50 years, are we planning on tearing down and building again? Or would it be even better to have something for 50 years and then a building that you can upgrade and you can add, right? So not necessarily 20 to 50, it was just a thought of what are our options, right? And especially as we hit this point that, yes, we didn't put this on the ballot in 2020, but none of us even thought that this would be our circumstance, 2 years later, right? And we are hitting our economy this way. So in that sense, thinking of, again, it was all the thoughts that Jamie, you said as well, that what are options? What are the things maybe we haven't thought about that we should at least entertain because of the circumstances that we are in today?
When did you say David's gonna have the updated numbers? Next meeting?
You should have it for the next meeting.
Are there other things that we want Justin and staff to come up with relative to these scenarios? And we have the sample resolutions and sample language. Obviously, the dates need to be correct, updated and all that stuff. Is there anything else that you can think of that we didn't provide or that you want to see? What's our bond limit again?
Get there.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for looking for it.
While Marie's looking, going back to the interlocal and lease agreement. If council does decide to change locations, those will have to be discussed probably at DAFD, no matter what. How do we want to go about potentially starting those conversations?
I don't think that'll be a problem. We can do it. You're just changing the address of the station.
Even if we wanted to talk to them about the cost of the lease.
As of last year, end of last year, past fiscal year, 16.9 million left.
Okay, left, bonding capacity left.
Right, so it would be more because obviously our millage rate is higher. And I can have that figured out. From
Yeah, that's okay. That's good. That gives me a ballpark. Thank you.
So is there a way to split where, so with City Hall, we didn't go to the voters. We bonded against our current assets, or I don't know how you would phrase that. Is there a way we split where we don't go, we take some of what our remaining ability is with just what we currently have, like we did with City Hall, and then, you know, split it 50-50. Half of it is a millage that goes to the voters and half of the mills is we get from, like we did with City Hall. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can structure it any way you want to as far as how much you're asking the voters for and pay the rest. Well,
And the whole key is you have to be able to make the payment.
yeah,
Right? The whole key is to be able to make the payment over whatever the period of time is, right?
right.
So if, I don't know, I'm looking at page 13. Let's look at the 10 million one. Let's go up to let's go up to page 10 or 11 or something, one of those. You know, to me, the key column in this is the annual debt service column. Because that's what we have to pay back each year if we borrow that amount. Right, so the 2024, the question is, do we have $658,628? If we have it in our general fund, we don't need to go to the voters to ask, right? We can make the payment.
Right.
We don't even need to ask the voters.
Right.
Okay, but then the question becomes, in the year following, do you have 671? And the
I
year
wouldn't
after-
propose fully doing that.
Yeah, that's why the question is out there, right? Because I don't know that we, you know, if we look at if we ask Justin, you know, what's the most you could carve out?
I mean,
And what are the sacrifices associated with that, you know, going forward for 20 years?
But so how did we do this with this building?
We had enough in our existing millage to be able to absorb the units.
We're paying annual debt service on that bond for the next 20 years.
And that came out of our general operating budget?
That's in our general, that's in the budget we just looked at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also have an existing geo bond that drops off in
2027.
2027. And so we molded the bond payback around that dropping off. So
We did what's called a wrap.
yeah, as that comes off, then our payback increases up to basically absorb that payback.
That was our previous facility bond for the DPW.
And what was the equivalent mill for this?
So it was about 150,000 per year, goes up to about 180, so a little less than a mil.
2/3 to 3/4.
And to answer your question, Jamie, I'm not 100% sure if you can mix and match, just because I'm not sure if the bond buyers would like that, I don't know.
Figure this.
Or if you have to dedicate so much to fund it, it's more desirable.
That's for sure.
Do we have a public event at all on our radar in terms of, like a Saturday morning, or I don't know, is that on our radar at all? That's still something we're wanting to do. Is it something we would do before we decide what goes on the ballot, or just something we would do before November?
You mean to talk about this?
Yeah, it seemed like, we talked about having an event with public or, something where we were getting the public feedback. Were we thinking we were gonna do that before we made the decision for the August ballot, or we were thinking we're doing that just before? I mean, I guess that's to voting, people start voting very early, but I didn't know what to think. In my mind, I was envisioning we were doing something before August to sort of gather public input on what our decision was going to be. Mid-June already, so now I don't know what kind of time we have left. Thought was behind it.
I think we would do it after we made the decision, and we would have a fact sheet to explain what we're trying to do. I think at this point. Do you know, is Ron able to get here?
She's not coming.
She's not coming? Okay. Sorry.
So are we thinking before the next meeting, we're having a work session to go over what David Gasson has done?
Yeah.
That was my thought.
Updated information.
Okay, and that would have new numbers for both scenarios.
Correct.
Is an hour enough time? I'm wondering if we back up our time.
If we start at the regular meeting later.
Or do you want to
Either
start
way,
the work session?
or 5:30 to start the work session, if people could make that, but it just seems like that's one you don't want to be pinched for time. And it might generate really good discussion, and if we have that time, that might be helpful. I just feel like I don't have enough stuff. And I know that, and I feel like always like the trend is coming.
I can come before the next meeting at 5:30.
We can start it early. That makes sense.
Well, my being that I think that, let's not do that. But if-
I don't have a problem as long as we're using the time. I mean, if David's gonna use up a chunk of the time to just update, what he's done, so. Will you be able to get the numbers from him and rerun scenarios?
That I don't know if we'll be able to do, because David was projecting to have them done on the 27th. I told him I need them before the weekend.
Okay. So we'll have to wrap up on that.
So,
Well, we've got 8 minutes. Any other questions?
Oh, the lease issue. So the lease was written into the interlocal agreement, like when this all started. And from the beginning, DFD's been paying $1. Is it a year or actually a year or a month?
I think it's $1 a year.
$1 a year.
Plus utilities.
Okay. So part of me feels like an argument could be made that the other members of the interlocal agreement were benefiting off of the infrastructure that the city had without really having to pay into that. For what period of time? Like how long until they each got their station? So this
Oh,
is an
long time.
85.
Long time, 25 years before.
This spring, Dexter Township is 5 or 6 years ago.
Right, right. So a long time, they weren't paying for any infrastructure. Um, I don't know. I mean, it's a way to say, hey, if this really is a communal thing, like, okay, we fronted the cost for this period of time. And if, maybe if they don't wanna, they're not gonna go to their people to request money beyond millage, which is gonna be a tough ask, but if they can't find it in their savings, is a way to get at that, is to have a lease payment that goes up, that's applicable only to the other two parties. I mean, I don't, if there's a way you can write it that way, I don't know if you write it that, then we still have to pay a third of what that lease is, I don't know. I don't know, I would be willing to consider that, and I kind of feel like that's fair, if you look at historically, they weren't paying for the building.
And I add to that historical that I don't believe there was discussion with us in terms of what they were building for their new station. That if there can be any some collaboration and function. So.
I mean, I'm not trying to do like tit for tat, I'm trying to say, I really want to do what's best for the whole DAFD service area, but I also want to do what's fair for our residents.
Well, Jamie, that's why I've said we don't need to have a meeting room in every building, every fire station. Because we should get the benefit of a room that's already built somewhere else.
But I guess if the chief is saying, look, that compromises our ability to function as a fire station typically functions, I don't want to make that trade-off. If that's what I feel like the response we're getting is, sure, you could do things at all these other stations, but it's really suboptimal. And maybe that's where I have a hard time making that trade-off.
Yep, understood.
But yeah, I think we all have very similar motivations. It's just how do we think we can best.
If the staffing was 2, 2, and 2, that would affect that as well. Operations would be different.
The reason why the two other units of government have a much higher cost now than we do. Ours is dropping, theirs is rising. You do a better job here than you do up there.
You mean the cost percentage?
Yeah.
Well, as Zach pointed out, it's runs that are for the service. And we just, and we only do 3 to 4 runs a day. Across the entire department, the average is 3 to 4 runs a day. It's not a tremendous volume. It just means that,
Somebody's got to be there when
yeah, more of them are occurring out there. There's a higher population out there. Just following the population, I think.
The population of the 2 townships are about 6,045, so there are more people. They also tend to be older, and a lot of the calls are medical needs.
Right.
So if you throw out your hit, trying to bring all your groceries in from Myers one time in the call,
I don't know how many calls go to the schools, but I mean, our population fluctuates,
Yes.
daily, way more I bet than the
And
township.
seasonally.
Seasonally and daily, but it's like, what is the estimated population on a typical work day when school is in session? How many people are physically in the city of Dexter?
and that's actually one of the fun fine tuning details for fire station design. Really tuned in fire station design is that you arrange things differently if you have more calls in the day or at night. So
I tell you, the guy that brought us down the street at 5:30 in the morning, with his log off. He's up and working at that time, I'll guarantee you that.
Okay, 6:58. Anybody need a restroom break before we start the meeting? Let's do that. and we'll